Welcome to Secret Story. The sun shone through the window to Sophie and Josh's bedroom, glowing a bright orange in the Saturday afternoon light. It was going to be another hot day, judging by the warmth the sun was creating, and that meant another hot night. Of course, it wasn't just the heat that was going to make it a hot night, Sophie thought, as she was looking through her closet trying to find something to wear. Tonight, Josh was having his poker night and Ben was coming over to play. Not only the game, she thought with a small smile on her face, her boyfriend's friend would be taking a lot of special care of her. She was looking forward to that Ben would give her tonight while everyone else was playing poker. She loved the stories of husbands or boyfriends betting their women in poker games and losing. She fantasized about Ben winning her that night while Josh knew what was happening downstairs, or in front of her boyfriend. It had become almost like a drug for her. The more she had it, and the more she pushed the illicit boundaries further, the more she needed it, and the more illicit things became. She stopped herself from thinking about Charles Riley's and carried on searching through the jumble of clothes. She had gone on a spending spree yesterday because Josh had finally been given the promotion Riley had promised him. Sophie smiled at the wicked thought that she may have earned that promotion for her boyfriend. But the fact was, after the contract signing those weeks back, Riley would have given him partnership. The with Sophie was just a bonus to the old man. They both enjoyed the idea of him for her boyfriend's promotion. They had had a significant increase in their income because of this promotion, and they had both been spending wildly since. They weren't millionaires, but they weren't wanting for cash either. She had bought clothes, lots of them, a new car, and had even had the spare room down the hall from their room redecorated. Josh had spent a little more lavishly. He had bought a new car, a pool table, decorated the downstairs room opposite the lounge to put it all in, put a bar in there. And had booked them a holiday to Barbados in a couple of weeks. They had even spoken about moving house but hadn't decided on anything yet. As she looked through her closet, she threw a pair of shorts out and suddenly smiled at what she found lying underneath them. A black French maid's outfit. Josh had bought it for her a while ago and had really enjoyed it when she wore it. She turned it over in her hands. It was still okay. She hadn't worn it in over 6 months. Her smile deepened. She jumped to her feet and closed the closet door. She had found what she would wear tonight. Josh Seymour was driving back home in his flash new sports car, listening to the radio as he drove along. He was looking forward to tonight. He loved playing poker, and he loved it even more when he won, and this time he knew he would win. After the success of beating Ben at the games night because of Sophie, he had asked her if she wouldn't mind dressing again tonight and flirting a little so he could win easier. Also, she could tell him what cards the others had and they wouldn't think because of looking at her. He trusted her completely, and not for 1 minute did he even suspect her of cheating on him. He would never want Sophie to be with another guy, just as he would never be with another girl. He didn't mind her helping him in flirting though. No touching, just harmless flirting. He smiled. They would play for real money tonight. He had lots now, and with that thought and the jingle of a couple of crates in the back, Josh smiled as he casually drove home to his loving girlfriend. Sophie Harper stood admiring herself in the bedroom stand mirror. She knew she was beautiful. She wasn't arrogant about the way she looked, she never put anyone else down, she always tried to build them up, but she knew just how beautiful she was. She wore a pair of black fishnet tights and a pair of black high heels. Her long straight blonde hair was tied back into a ponytail and hung down past the middle of her shoulder blades. In her hair, at the front, she wore a small maid's tiara. She looked stunning and she knew it. She stared a little while longer, turning this way and that, looking herself over. She moved away from the mirror and began to clear all of the clothes from the room back into the closet. She was humming to herself as she went along. When she finished, she walked back to the stand mirror, put her hands on her hips, and smiled. "You'll do, Miss Harper," she said to her reflection, "you look every part the welcoming hostess, you've just got to take very good care of your guests, now," she said, "especially your boyfriend's best friend." She smiled wickedly at herself, and turning to walk out of the room. 15 minutes later, Sophie stood in the lounge placing piles of chips in the center of the table. She had covered it with its blue cloth already. As she was setting the table out, she was lost in thought. Josh had said who was coming over, but she couldn't remember many names. There were 4 of his friends from work, his co-workers, coming over to play poker, and Ben also. She remembered one of them, Richie, she thought his name was. He was a short, Japanese man, younger than her and Josh, but he was always being odd. He reminded her of a rat, the way he was always healing people who were important or popular, so that he might be both. He always seemed pretty sneaky too. So that left 3 people that she didn't know. She was sure they were all male though, otherwise, Josh wouldn't have asked her to dress provocatively. She put the thoughts aside anyway, she was only really interested in Ben coming over anyway. Especially in this outfit. A short while after finishing the table, Sophie was in the kitchen having a nice cool drink. The evening was coming on, but it was still nice and warm. It would be a pleasant evening again. She was just starting to drink when she heard a car pull up onto the driveway, and then a short while later the front door opened and closed. Walking into the kitchen, Sophie turned and leaned against the counter looking at her boyfriend as he placed 2 crates of beer on the counter opposite her. She smiled at that thought. But she also smiled at her boyfriend. He was so handsome. He was tall and well built, with not an ounce of fat on him. He wasn't built with big muscles, but he was still fit. Not only that, but he was the kindest man she knew. He began talking to her, telling her how busy the store was. It took him a full 5 minutes before he suddenly stopped. Sophie just stood there smiling and sipping her drink. "Whoa. Soph," was all he could manage to get out as he finally noticed what she was wearing. "What?" she asked coyly. "Where did you find that?" he asked. "Find what?" she teased him a little. "That outfit. Is that what you're wearing tonight?" he asked, still not moving his eyes from their obvious attraction. "Oh, this," Sophie smiled and placed her drink down. "Yeah, I thought it would suit well for a hostess. What do you think?" And with that she gave him a little twirl, and then facing him again, she placed her hands on her hips. Josh stuttered for a little time, fumbling for his words as he took in the whole sight of her. "Well, yeah. Yeah, I think you look great. But don't you think it might be a little over the top?" he asked, still ogling her. "A little. But you said," she replied with a small smile. "Yeah, I did, but..." he began, but she interrupted him. "What? Are you scared one of them might touch me?" She held down flutters in her stomach as thoughts of Ben raced through her mind. "No, but, could you blame them thinking it when you're dressed so?" Hot, he replied. "That's the idea though. Let them think what they want, I can handle them. Nobody will do anything to me except what I want. And that's to take their mind off the game to help you win, right?" she said and ended with a small smile. "Right," he said. He did seem a bit calmer now. "Nobody will beat me tonight." He smiled at her and walked over to kiss her. Josh had already put the beer in a cool box by the table and was getting himself mentally ready for a game of poker. Not that he thought that he would need it, after seeing how Sophie was dressed. No one would be able to concentrate on this game, even him, and he was her boyfriend. He didn't mind what she was wearing. And he had no doubts about her faithfulness to him. He just didn't want any of the guys to get a bit rowdy after drinking and start trying anything on with her. He didn't want her to be upset, and he didn't want any arguments. He knew she would flirt with them, especially Ben. He was good at poker, she had said. He didn't know what the others were like at the game, he had never played them before. The flirting he knew was for him, to help him. He smiled at his beautiful 22-year-old girlfriend as she walked past. Everything was going to be fine, he thought, and smiled at the idea of taking all the money tonight for his little surprise for Sophie next week. Sophie was sitting looking into the mirror of her dressing table as she was finishing off her makeup when she heard music and a couple of cars pull up outside the house. The music was hip-hop, and it was being played very loudly. She listened as Josh went out to meet them, and she heard voices as they all talked and laughed on their way to the house. She could even make out a deep male voice, and a higher voice, which sent a chill down her spine. That had to be Richie, he always sent a chill down her spine. Sophie finished up her makeup. Her cheeks and eyes were emphasized by the blusher and the eyeliner, although you could hardly see that she was wearing any makeup at all. She didn't actually need to, she was flawless in every way, but she liked making herself up. Her full pink lips were now a dark red color, they looked even more full and ready. She smiled at herself and gave a deep throaty giggle. Tonight is going to be hot, she thought to herself, and promptly got up and headed out of the bedroom. When Sophie got downstairs, she could hear voices in the lounge. She straightened her dress and took a deep breath to still the butterflies in her stomach and went inside. Everyone was sitting around the green felt-topped poker table, with open bottles next to their own piles of chips. Josh had his back to her where he was sitting, and opposite him, two guys sat. One was handsome, very good-looking in fact. He didn't look very tall, only a few inches taller than Sophie herself. He looked very clean and well-dressed. He had a shirt and jeans on and was laughing with the others, but was far calmer. To his left sat another guy, he was about the same height as Josh, and was at a contrast with the good-looking guy next to him, as he was just an average-looking man. Nothing really seemed to mark him out from any other guy she had ever seen. In between the average man and Josh, was Ben. He noticed Sophie the instant she walked in. If she didn't know better, she would say he had been waiting for her. She smiled deeply at him, and he returned the favor with a cheeky grin as he looked her up and down. On the other side of Josh sat a black man, but he was the biggest man she had ever seen. He was wearing only jeans and a white muscle top. He wasn't fat at all, he looked to be made of pure muscle. Even sitting down, he dominated the room with his size. He had to be at least 6 feet 7 inches, maybe even 6 feet 10 inches. He was bald too, which added to his domineering manner. Finally, in between the big black man and the good-looking guy, sat Richie. A small Japanese man with a leering stare and a disgusting look. He too had noticed Sophie walk in and was openly ogling her. The sight of the man made her wish she had worn something else. Suddenly, everyone seemed to realize that someone else had walked into the room, and they all turned to her, and the noise immediately stopped. Each one of them was openly staring at her. All with very appreciating looks, very appreciating. Sophie just smiled lightly at them all. "Who is this, man?" The big black man asked Josh in that deep voice Sophie recognized from outside. What a way to start, this guy was pissing her off already, and you better not refer to me that way again, or you can get out of my house, okay? Whoa, I'm sorry, okay. I meant no offense, he replied to her, holding his hands up in defense. Fine, and thank you, she replied. He was going to be annoying, she could tell. Baby, this is Tyler, Josh said, referring to the big black man. Richie, you know, he pointed to the rat-faced Asian man. That's Paul, that was the good-looking one. And Steve, he said, pointing to the average-looking guy. They all said hi, and Sophie replied her greetings back to each of them. They were still all staring at her. Hey, Ben, how are you doing? Sophie asked, with a smile for him. I'm good, Soph, you? He replied cheekily, grinning at her. I'm fine. I'm sure I'll be better later though, when it's all settled in, she said, and smiled at him teasingly. The others were just looking at her, and Josh was smiling at her, knowing that he already had that money bagged up. She smiled back at her boyfriend and then spoke to everyone. I'm your hostess for tonight, and I am here to make things more comfortable, she said, and added with a look at Ben, and more entertaining too. I hope you all have a good game. If you want to make my night more comfortable, why don't you sit that down here? Tyler said to her, and patted his lap. Sophie tried to not look irritated, because I have my own place to sit, she said, and placed her arms around Josh's neck, leaning forward a little. Sophie gave him a wry smile. "You wouldn't know what to do if I did," she said to him, and stood up straight. Tyler roared with laughter, quickly to be followed by Richie. "I like this bit, lady," he said with a smile at her and raised his bottle. "I think I'm going to have a good night," and he took a swig. "I'll go and get some chips," Sophie said to Josh, and walked around the table. She could feel the eyes follow her as she walked out. When she walked through the glass doors into the kitchen, she heard Tyler say. She restrained herself from going back in to yell at him, or at Josh for not saying anything. She figured though that if Tyler was talking about her, he wasn't concentrating on the game. Tonight may not be as fun as she thought. The night began innocently enough, there wasn't really any incidents, and everyone kept their hands to themselves. Other than that, things were going smoothly. She even managed to flirt a little with Ben, although with everyone's eyes except Josh's watching her, she couldn't really do much. Not only that, but she didn't want any other comments from Tyler. She knew she would get one if she sat on Ben's lap. However, she couldn't escape that easily. Everything was going fine until Ben won a hand and Josh made the mistake of saying to Sophie that maybe she should sit on his lap as he had won the hand. Sophie knew that he only meant it as a way of distracting Ben, but she also knew what would happen, as soon as he opened his mouth to say it. "Hey man, if that's the prize, I'll win the next hand," Tyler exclaimed, and Richie looked greedily at his cards. Sure enough, Tyler won the next hand. "See, honey, you just get comfy, because Tyler's going to keep on winning," Tyler said to her with a large grin. He was true to his word, and he won the next few rounds. He began slyly, but each time he grew in confidence and tried less to hide his actions. Josh didn't notice any of it. Sophie had kept herself calm, thinking she didn't want to ruin the night, but each time she got more and more pissed off. Finally, when her patience was just at an end, he lost a hand to Josh, and she quickly moved to sit. Ben had a look of jealousy quite a lot. It was like he thought she was his, that he was her boyfriend. Josh smiled at her a few times and didn't look the least bit worried or concerned about his girlfriend being passed around like a toy. He was winning more often than not now, but after the last time Sophie was on his lap, he had whispered to her not to sit on him, that she was the reason he was winning so much and that when she was on his lap, they all tried so much harder to win. So, Sophie had to sit on everyone's lap whether they won the round or not. That way they didn't try too hard to win. She was getting really fed up with it all, especially after Richie. Annoyed, Sophie walked. She was boiling with anger and fury over the nerve of Tyler when she stormed into the bathroom. She didn't need to be there, but she had to be away from the guy. She was standing looking at herself in the mirror when there came a knock on the door. "Who is it?" she called, trying to act calm. "It's me," came the muffled reply of Ben's voice. Straightening her dress, she walked over to the door, unlocked it, and let her boyfriend's friend in, promptly locking the door after him. "He's such an A." Sophie began but was promptly cut off. She kissed him back for a little while. Feeling her anger subside, she almost jumped out of her perfectly formed skin when another knock came on the door she was leaning against. Surprised more than frightened, she was just about to ask who it was when Ben said, "Who is it?" She looked at him quizzically, and then heard the reply, "It's Josh," came the answer to his question. Sophie smiled at Ben now and knew what he was about to say before he did. Quietly he mouthed the words. Her boyfriend was outside the bathroom door behind her, and she was here, on her knees, looking straight into the eyes of his best friend. Ready. This was even better than she had imagined. Josh knocked on the door, expecting Sophie to answer, but instead he heard Ben's voice. He knew that Sophie obviously didn't like Tyler, but she must have been more pissed off than he thought if he couldn't find her. He wasn't worried too much though, he knew she could handle herself. Ben looked down at the beautiful girlfriend. "What's up, mate?" he asked his best friend, her boyfriend. "Just wondering if you know where Sophie is, man." "She seems to have stormed off," was the reply of the unknowing boyfriend. "Nah, man, sorry. I'm sure she's around here somewhere though, Ben answered. Yeah, I suppose you're right. She seems a bit pissed with Ty. Though, Josh continued. She doesn't lee. Clearing his throat, Ben finished what he was about to say. She doesn't like him much, I think. Sophie smiled up as she looked into Ben's eyes. I'm sure she'll be around here somewhere, Ben said, smiling down at his friend's blonde girlfriend. I suppose. Are you coming down, because we want to carry the game on, and you're the one who deals next? Josh said. Ben finally caught his breath, and answered the patient boyfriend outside the door. It had taken him a little while. Better than a pro, in fact. Finally, bringing his head forward again, he looked down at Sophie as she looked up at him, and remembered he hadn't answered her boyfriend. Sorry, man, what did you say? He asked. You drank too much already? Josh asked with a little laugh. Ben thought that he wouldn't be laughing if he saw his girlfriend Sophie was lowering her face again downwards, still with her eyes staring into his. Nah, man. I just have other things on my mind right now, Ben answered through clenched teeth. I can guess. I don't really want to know, though, Josh responded. Yeah, Ben groaned lightly, it feels good though, mate. Yeah, sure it does. That's more than I want to know though, mate, Josh replied. You probably wouldn't want to know, mate, Ben replied. So, you'll be coming soon then? Josh asked, not knowing how near to the truth his question was. So loud that Ben thought Josh had to be wondering what they were. What was that? Josh asked, referring to the whisper Ben had made. I'll be soon, Ben replied, not really sure whether he had meant that for Sophie or her boyfriend. They both took it as for them, cool. I'll see you downstairs in a minute then, mate, Josh said, then added, if you see Sophie, can you let her know I was looking for her? Sure, Ben replied through clenched teeth. Josh walked downstairs wondering where Sophie had gotten to and dreading to think what his friend must have eaten to produce those weird sounds from the bathroom. Her head began to bang off the door behind her, slamming against it. She was just glad that Josh wasn't still there, or there wasn't much of a way to explain that noise. Finally, she wiped the blobs on the floor and threw the towel into the wash bin. What are you doing? She asked incredulously. Going downstairs. Thanks, he answered and had the audacity to smile down at her. Standing up quickly, Sophie looked up at him, clearly angry. What do you mean, you're going downstairs? She demanded. After that, he said, still with that stupid smile on his face. What? You twice before, she said a little startled. Yeah, but not in a situation like this, he answered. What? She demanded. Ben pushed past her to unlock the door. Where are you going? She demanded again. Her hands on her hips. I told you, downstairs. I have a game to play, he answered smugly, and you're not going me, she asked, holding back her rage. Not just now. Maybe later, he said, and he opened the door and walked out, not bothering to close the door after him. He smiled at her and turned to walk down the stairs. Sophie was totally pissed off now. Firstly, with Ben, she would make sure she got her revenge on him. She thought about phoning Charles Riley, but decided against it. It might look bad, she had no reason to see him on a Saturday after all. If it had ended up pissing her off so much. She needed, and badly. She turned to look in the mirror and fix her hair while she thought of what to do. Who did he think he was getting what he wanted and not giving her anything? As she fixed her hair, a thought came to her. He thought she was his, did he? The perfect idea came into her mind and her smile returned as she turned to walk out of the bathroom. Sophie walked downstairs and back through into the lounge. The room still had stayed much the same, except most of the winnings were going to Tyler. He sat back with a cigar and a large pile of cash in front of him. Hey, the game has just got a lot more interesting, he bellowed as Sophie walked back into the room. He openly stared at her. Sophie glared at him as she walked past and through into the kitchen. He whistled at her as she walked past in her little black maid's outfit. But she just ignored him. She wasn't in the mood for any of Tyler's stupidity anymore. She was annoyed now. Annoyed at Ben. Annoyed at Tyler for being who he was and not leaving her alone. Annoyed at Josh for not saying something to Tyler for saying what he had been saying. The only thing she could do was get revenge on Ben. Her plan was simple and would be in 2 parts. The first part she couldn't do tonight. That involved not allowing Ben again. The second part was to flirt with Paul, and maybe Steve to some extent, but mainly Paul. He was the good-looking one in there and had been the perfect gentleman. Yes, flirting with another guy, maybe 2, and denying Ben would be the perfect revenge. She felt her mood lighten at the thought and made herself a drink with a smile on her face, before going back through into the lounge to execute her plan. Yes, tonight may pay off after all. Tyler watched the hot, white girl walk around the table as the game played on. Well, she walked from Paul to Josh, and occasionally Steve, but never to him. Or Richie and Ben. Something was going on there. He didn't mind as much though. He planned on getting her tonight. He smiled at her as she continued to flirt mainly with Paul during the game. Ben watched as Sophie walked past him again, totally blanking him as she had done for the last hour. Something was wrong with her, but he didn't know what. He had noticed her flirting with Paul a lot during the last hour or so and he tried to keep the jealous look from his face. He couldn't let Josh see that look. Looking over at his best friend, he noticed Josh not even paying attention to what Sophie was doing. He must be doing that thing where he let Sophie flirt to win. It had worked last time, although he didn't know about what had happened after he had gone to sleep. No, if she had been his girlfriend he wouldn't have let her flirt like this for winning money on a poker game however much he trusted her. He watched her, trying to hide his jealousy, as the game and Sophie's flirting continued. He pushed back his greasy black hair onto his head and stared at the cards in his hands. Maybe he could find a way to get what he wanted, he just needed to wait for the right opportunity. That was how he worked, sneakily. There was no need to show yourself in the light if you were going to get burned. No, he would wait patiently and find a way. He didn't care whether she wanted him afterwards. Although maybe he could take some pictures and blackmail her into letting him have her when he wanted. Now that was a thought. He idly asked Josh if he had a video camera and was thrilled when he said yes. Now all he needed was that chance, he would have to find a way. She would never cheat on Josh, he was sure of that too, and he wouldn't hurt her if she offered, she was his workmate's girlfriend after all. Although the thought of having her. No, he couldn't do that to his friend, or could he? Suddenly he was confused. He shook his head to try and clear his thoughts and tried to concentrate on playing the game. His concentration slipped as time went on, though. What would he do? Paul was always surrounded by beautiful women. He knew that he was attractive to most women, however, he wasn't arrogant about the fact, he was just honest. That was how he was. He was always honest. He had never lied in his life as far as he could remember. He had been brought up in a strict religious home but had left when his father found out that along with other women liking him, including the minister's wife. His own mother and sister did too. He was just that handsome. He stopped that line of thought quickly he tried to refrain from. Calm and cool he had to be. Josh studied the cards in his hands, then looked up at the other guys sitting around the table playing the game of poker with him. Sophie was sitting on Paul's again, which surprised him, as Tyler was the one who was winning, next to Josh, of course. She had been flirting mainly with Paul, Steve, and himself, leaving Ben, Richie, and Tyler out of it. The last two he could understand because she didn't like either of them, but she hadn't even looked at Ben since he had gone upstairs to speak to him in the bathroom. And Ben was third in the winning stakes. He looked again and noticed that Steve and Paul had the lowest amount of money left. Ah, he thought, she's getting the ones with the lowest amount out first. Very clever, my girl, and he smiled to himself. Yes, tonight was going to be a good night. He was going to take all of these guys' money, and with it, his surprise for Sophie would be that much better. Oh yes, this night was going even better than he had planned. The party was really about to begin. Sophie was standing in the kitchen making herself her third drink of the night. She hadn't drunk much. Ben had had such a jealous look on his face she was surprised nobody had commented on it. Of course, he must be thinking that no one would notice. That he hid it well, but he had never been very good at hiding things. But the reason Sophie Harper was standing in her kitchen was she was trying to calm herself down. She had come up with a plan with her tonight. She needed it badly and she wasn't going to get it from Ben. He would have done anything for her now. He was jealous, but she wouldn't let him. It would serve him right for treating her the way he had. But Paul would be good. Sophie downed her drink quickly, straightened herself up, and walked back into the lounge. It was time to set her plan in operation. She walked towards the table and stood staring at the guys sitting around it and their money piles, noticing Paul was almost out of cash. One more hand, she figured, and he'd be out. She smiled at Paul, and walked behind Josh and rested her hands on his shoulders. "You okay, babe?" he asked. "Yeah, baby," she answered, and kissed him lightly on the head. "I'm going to have a game of pool, though." "Cool," her loving boyfriend replied and returned his gaze back to the game. "The next one to lose is free to come and join me for a game if they want," Sophie said generally to the group, but looking specifically at Paul. Even if they all continued to fold, Paul would still lose first. "Okay," was the general reply, no one sounding overly interested. With one more smile for Paul, into the hall, and across into the pool room. She moved to the pool table and picked up a cue. Then began taking the balls out and placing them on the table delicately. She had taken them all out and was setting them up when she heard the door behind her, the door to the hallway opposite the lounge, open. She turned around with a smile on her face, which quickly disappeared when she saw who it was. "What are you doing here?" Sophie asked as Tyler walked through the door to the hallway, gently closing it behind him. As he turned to face her, he smiled and spoke, "I've come for that game of pool you offered." He openly leered at her. "Maybe I can teach you how to play properly," he said, returning his dark smile to her pretty face. "I'm good at playing actually, and I don't want to play with you." "Anyway," she said. "You will," was all he said. Sophie let her annoyance at moving away from him get the better of her. There was no way she was going to be pushed around in her own home, especially by this disgusting, arrogant boy. She was not going to be bullied in her own house. Tyler just stared down at her as she angrily glared at him. After a little while his eyes lowered for an instant, and Sophie thought that she had made him back down. Anger flashed through Sophie as she realized what he had said, and she quivered with anger. She held her tongue from lashing out at him. Instead, she glared angrily at him. She said angrily, and walked off again around the table. He just smiled after her as she walked off. Sophie was furious. "So do you want a game or what?" Tyler asked, not affected by her words at all. "No," Sophie snapped. "Anyway, aren't you playing poker? I thought you were winning." "I said the one who lost can play." That should get him, Sophie thought to herself. She just wanted him to go away. She was already fuming still over what Ben had done, and Tyler had been annoying her all night. Now she was alone in a room with him, and he wouldn't leave her alone. "I thought I'd give everybody else a chance. I'm a nice guy, see," Tyler said, still smiling. "And you just thought you'd be a nice guy and come and bother me, huh?" Sophie said, finding it hard to control her anger and irritation. That thought annoyed her even more. She really hated this guy. "Ah, will you just off and leave me alone, you irritating. I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want to be near you, so just off and go away," Sophie yelled at him. Tyler looked taken aback a little, and that grin vanished from his face quickly. He must not have expected her to be this pissed off with him. He looked at her carefully and backed away a couple of steps. She half expected Josh to come through to see what was going on, but nobody did. Whoa, okay, okay. I'm going, he said, and turned and opened the door. The door closed quietly, and Sophie leaned on the table's edge. She couldn't believe how angry she had gotten. But he just irritated her so much. Everything about him annoyed her. At least now he should leave her alone. Although something about the way he left made her think. She turned to lean against the table to try and calm herself down. She thought about giving Riley a call before this feeling got out of hand, when a light knock came at the door from the hall. She stood up and turned to face the doorway as it opened. Tyler popped his big head through the opening, and before she could tell him to off again he spoke. Hold on, I'm not here to say anything, okay, just hear me out please. Sophie kept herself composed as her anger boiled inside her, but hearing the pleas she thought she would give him a chance to speak before having a go at him again. Go on, was all she said. He came in the rest of the way and gently shut the door again. He seemed odd, like he was trying to be meek. Trying. Well, I know you don't like me, he said, and Sophie cut in. It took you this long to figure that out, she said in a more than annoyed tone. Well, I'm sorry if I've annoyed you. I didn't mean to. It's just I believe in saying what I think, you know, so people know that I'm an honest guy, and I thought you'd take it as a compliment, you know, woman like you, he said, and cut off that line of thought as she glared at him dangerously. Well, yeah, so I'm just being me and all, you know, but if you don't like it, how about we make a deal? Sophie looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean, a deal? Well, not really a deal, more like a bet, you know, a little wager, he said, his face looking more honest and calm than it had when he came in. I don't think so, Sophie replied, and was about to tell him to get out again when he spoke first. Just listen, please, he said, and she remained quiet, her patience beginning to run out. You don't want me to be me and say all these things to you, that's cool. I mean, we can have a game of pool and we can put a little bet on who wins. Say, if you win, then I won't say anything dirty to, or about, you ever again, and I mean ever again. Sophie looked at him suspiciously again, and if you win, she asked. Nothing bad, not what you're thinking, he assured her. If I win, I can say anything I want to you tonight, only tonight though, and you won't complain about it. Ha! Forget that. I wouldn't go near you for anything. No way, this is my house, and you'll stop mouthing off at me or you can get out, she replied angrily at him. She was trying to keep her cool, but all the anger was only making her hornier. And it's Josh's house, and he invited me, he replied to her. It did make sense, Josh wouldn't want him to leave until he had won everything, but Tyler hadn't finished, and if I lose I won't ever say anything to you again that you don't want me to, I promise. All you'd have to do is ignore me and sit on my lap for one night. It made sense in a way, but Sophie was too angry at this point to care. No, she said, and went to walk out of the room, leaning her cue against the table. All meekness now had gone. Sophie turned on him as she was next to the door, anger boiling up in her. Tyler stood 5 feet away, but still towered over her. She shouted at him. I love it when you're angry, Sophie, Tyler said, still grinning at her. The anger grew too much inside of her, and she spoke without thinking, too angry to care anymore. Fine, I'll take your stupid bet, and play this stupid game. You can't beat me anyway, she said to him on the point of almost yelling, and stormed around the table to pick up her cue. Then you haven't got any reason to be angry, have you? You'll beat me, and I won't say anything, he said, a little smugly, but Sophie was too angry to notice. Before she got ready for her shot, she tried to calm herself down. Anger would only make her make mistakes. She leant over the table to take her first shot, and Tyler walked to the side of the table next to her. The game was on. He had a lot riding on this game and how well he played tonight, if all went well for. He needed to concentrate for this trap to work. She had taken the bait because of her anger at him, but he would finish it. He let his smile fade away, not only because she was winning, but also because the game was on. Josh laid another winning hand down on the table and smiled at the guys surrounding him. He had won for the third time in a row, and his pile of money was looking quite impressive now. He looked at all the money in Tyler's pile and wondered where he was. His black coworker had said he was going to relieve himself, but he hadn't come back yet. Must be really needing it, Josh thought with a smile. I would be if I was playing poker with me. Little did he know that Tyler was playing pool with Sophie, making an innocently seeming bet that was the beginning of a trap for Josh's 22-year-old blonde knockout of a girlfriend. He was playing as hard as he could, trying his best to beat her. Sophie smiled to herself as she sank her last ball into the corner pocket. Only the black left to go, and Tyler had 3 balls still left on the table. This was going to be easy. She felt pride grow within her as she aimed the ball for an easy shot into the side pocket. She had made this shot many times before and she could do it with her eyes closed. The cue ball was placed right behind the 8 ball, directly in line with the middle pocket. There was no way she could miss. She lined the cue up ready for the shot, aimed, and drew the cue back ready to strike the ball, then waited. An idea flitted up into her mind, a thought of how she could end this all quickly. She had thought about Tyler's bet, and figured he may not be able to say anything about her anymore. But he could still ogle her and smile at her. That irritated her just as much as the things he said. In fact, just being around the guy pissed her off. He was just so obnoxious. So, the thought flickered across her mind again as she stared at the 8 ball and the straight path it had into the pocket. I want to change our bet, she said with a small smile on her face, looking straight at Josh's big black coworker. What? You can't change it after we've started playing. Anyway, you're about to win, Tyler responded to her. Ah, are you scared of a little bet? Sophie crooned. No, I just know when not to make a useless one, that's all, Tyler answered, for once not having the look of victory on his face or in his eyes. Sophie felt a surge of happiness as she realized she was about to win, and there was nothing the annoying black coworker of her boyfriend could do to stop it. She could finally have a way to get rid of him for good without any risk at all. How could she resist? So, she spoke again. Oh, come on, you don't even know what the bet is yet, at least listen to it, she said in her best innocently pleading tone of voice. If she had to act pleading to get him to accept this bet, she would. When you're about to win anyway, no way. Tyler answered and looked at her. She continued to look pleadingly up at him from the other side of the table, and finally, he said, fine. What bet? Sophie smiled and restrained herself from jumping up and down. Simple. If I win this game, you have to leave and never bother me ever again, she said sweetly. What? No way. Look at the table, you can't lose, he replied, forget it. He was about to put the cue down and walk out when Sophie spoke again. He had to accept this bet, or she would have to be around him, and that thought irritated her as much as having him saying things to her. Hold on, I didn't tell you what you would get if you won, did I? She said, smiling.